Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Thelma and Louise, starring Gina Davis, Susan Sarandon, Harvey Keitel, Michael Madsen, Christopher McDonald, Steven Tobolowsky, and Brad Pitt, directed by Ridley Scott. Now, I've heard some things about this movie, as I've never seen it, so let's get into it and we'll see if it's a good movie like I've been hearing everybody saying it is. We open in the diner where Louise, played by Susan Sarandon, works at as she goes on a break and calls housewife Thelma, played by Gina Davis, as Louise tells Thelma to approve it with her husband, Daryl, played by Christopher McDonald, as he's the biggest asshole to the not only Thelma, but their workers at the house. And I honestly don't like this character as he comes off like a son of a bitch. Thelma decides to go with Louise to their trip as she packs a pistol in her purse, and Louise picks up Thelma at her house. And I very much like our two protagonists, as director Ridley Scott does a very good job with not only their characters as heroines, but their relationship with each other, and their arcs are tremendous. Thelma and Louise stop at a restaurant slash bar to have some dinner until Harlan comes in and flirts with Thelma. And after their dinner, she goes dancing with Harlan, while Louise goes to the bathroom and Harlan takes Thelma outside to rape her until Louise comes in with the pistol. And he gets all aggressive, and by he I mean Harlan, and Louise shoots Harlan dead because he was being an asshole as well, which is a great way to kick off the plot of the movie, which is two women on the run from their lives as they become fugitives. And this is a very good plot. Louise gets Thelma in the car while Louise needs to think of an idea to get them out of jail, and they stop at a diner so she can think while Thelma acts hysterical and accidentally breaks some dishes and gets up to call Daryl. Meanwhile, we get introduced to a detective named Hal, played by Harvey Keitel, and he's another character I really like throughout the movie, as Louise realizes she has blood in her hands, and they drive off to go to a motel room so Louise can rest and think of what to do. And again, Thelma is acting rather too hysterical, while Louise isn't ready to go to jail yet, and the cinematography is really good as the shots are well done from start to finish. Louise calls her ex-boyfriend Jimmy, played by Michael Madsen, to wire her $600 because she's in deep shit, and she doesn't tell him why to transfer the money except for the reasons I just explained, and Louise gets Thelma out of the pool to only get her in the car to run off to Oklahoma City to get some money. And after that, Louise decides to go to Mexico and asks Thelma if she wants in, but doesn't give an answer yet. And Louise stops by a phone booth to call Jimmy and tells her to get to a hotel and to grab the money under the code word Peaches. And she tells Thelma to call Daryl, as she does, and he acts all rude and shit while watching a football game as he demands her to get home that very night, but she says, "Go fuck yourself" to him. And she hangs up all pissed off and bumps into JD, played by Brad Pitt, in his very first role. And this character is probably my favorite character in the movie, and the writing is very well done, as is the acting throughout the movie. Thelma wants to take JD with them, while Louise doesn't think it's a good idea as they drive off, as Louise doesn't want to go to Mexico. Or Thelma, I mean. Or actually, it's Louise who doesn't want to go to Mexico through Texas for personal reasons, as she doesn't want to talk about it. Which seems a little fishy as they drive and have a good time with Hal, while Hal investigates to find the killer of Harlan by finding Thelma and Louise, and they find JD and eventually pick him up, as Thelma talks about Daryl, about how Daryl seems like an asshole, as Louise knows and JD is learning about it. And I like that we get to know the characters, even JD. Louise stops at a place to get the $600 and uses the code name Peaches, while Jimmy is there, and Louise kicks JD out of the car as Thelma is getting to know him, and they take Jimmy along to a hotel, and Thelma annoys Louise as she has to go to Jimmy's room while he's acting all abusive and shit as JD stops by Thelma's room and keeps her company. And this is a fun, entertaining movie that I'm actually having a good time with from start to finish. Louise is smooching Jimmy while Thelma smooches JD like crazy, and the next day comes and Louise has breakfast with Jimmy as he gets in a taxi cab and they go their separate ways as Thelma enters the diner and shows Louise the hickey JD gave her, and while they're there, JD steals the money and they find out by leaving him alone with the money, which came out of the blue, that he took it. Like, my jaw hit the fucking floor at this shock. Hal goes to Daryl's house to ask some questions about Thelma while Thelma politely robs a market store, which was hilarious when the reveal came to be when Hal and the cops were watching as Louise comes off upset, but at the same time she robbed the fucking store, and they drive off acting like a couple of first-time criminals as they drive by a truck, and the truck driver hits on Thelma and Louise like he wants some of them, but that shit ain't going to happen for them, and the cops get to Jimmy's house to interrogate him, and Louise sells her watch for some money, and the editing is tightly told as far as the story is concerned. Louise tells Thelma to call Daryl, but she chooses not to as JD gets arrested and interrogated by Hal, and the cops, while Daryl acts like an asshole to the cops when they bring in JD and he insults Daryl by saying he fucked his wife, as we get to a stop with Thelma and calling Daryl twice, and she and Louise know the cops are there as he knows what happened to them, as well as she knows there's cops as they tap the phones, and Louise talks with Hal as he's led to believe they know Louise's plan. Thelma told Daryl about it over the phone, and Louise is pissed off about it, and they drive off, and that was a great way to not get traced by the cops, and it works for the movie. Thelma and Louise continue driving day and night until they eventually stop the car to rest until sunrise, and it keeps going as they bump into the same truck as well as the driver, and we move on to the next scene as Thelma talks about what Harlan said to Louise, like it was funny, and she asks about what happened in Texas, and she still doesn't tell the story as the cops come up behind for them for speeding reasons, so the cop almost calls in the others, and Thelma pulls out the gun to his head, and Thelma asks Louise to shoot the radio, and Thelma shoots the tires and puts the cop in his trunk of his own and car, and they escape, and that was a smart scene, as it was smartly acted and executed, as this whole movie is smartly executed. Thelma and Louise's car almost gets busted by some cows in Texas, while as Louise was like, fuck it, let's go through Texas, and Louise makes another call to Hal about how the whole thing was an accident, but Hal wants to have a chat with Louise about it, and Thelma hangs up the phone, and the cops led by Hal get their location because Louise was stalling on the phone, and the dialogue was very acted very well by the actors, and they get back in the car and we see a mountain, which is a great shot as they continue their trip to Mexico while listening to some music, which is a hell of a lot of fun. They pass by the same truck the third time, and they both pull over and lead him to the middle of nowhere as they ask him to apologize, but he doesn't, and they shoot the truck and blow it up and leave him behind all alone, which is the best scene in the whole movie in my opinion. One way they could teach this motherfucker some manners: a biker hears the cop in the truck and doesn't get him out, but instead blows a cigarette breath in the trunk, while Hal looks for Thelma and Louise in a helicopter while the cops are on their tail and have a chase in the middle of the desert as they get away until the helicopter surrounds them, as well as a bunch of cop cars. And they stop by the ledge in the Grand Canyon, and Thelma and Louise decide to go off the ledge in order to get away, and this climax was fun as this entire movie in my opinion, as I had a fun time with it at the end of the day, but I wish I knew whether they get to Mexico successfully or not. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 8.4 out of 10. I like the characters, as director Ridley Scott does a very good job with not only making the characters likable as heroines, and but the protagonists with but the relationship between the two protagonists with each are and their arcs are tremendous, as the plot was very good from start to finish and very well told. The cinematography is really good in this movie, as the shots were well done, as is the writing and the acting throughout the movie. And I like that we get to know the characters, as JD is my favorite character in the movie, in my opinion. This was a fun and entertaining ride that I actually had a good time with from start to finish, as the editing was tight by the end of the movie, as this is a solid recommendation for this movie, as this was an enjoyable film along with Alien and Blade Runner so far, and hopefully there's some other good movies out there by director Ridley Scott. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with 1492 Conquest to Paradise. And until then, turn around.